In general, attacks on security can be categorized into three different types. Criminal attacks that exist for criminal intentions and usually for profit. Publicity attacks that are not necessarily for profit. And legal attacks which may or may not be profit-seeking. Criminal attacks are the most obvious and the type that is easiest to focus on. Publicity attacks and legal attacks are probably more damaging. Criminal attacks are the easiest to understand. The criminal asks, how can I acquire the maximum financial return by attacking some system? This is usually pulled off by various different criminals, lone criminals or sophisticated crime syndicates, insiders looking to make a quick profit, or a foreign government looking to wage war on one country's infrastructure. Fraud is probably the most typical kind of crime. Fraud has been attempted against every commerce system ever invented. So unscrupulous merchants have used rigged scales to shortchange their customers. People have shaved silver and gold off the rims of coins. Everything in existence has been counterfeited. Currency, stock certificates, credit cards, checks, letters of credit, purchase orders, casino chips, you name it. Modern financial systems, like credit cards or ATM machines, rack up multi-million-dollar fraud losses every year. Electronic commerce is no different, and neither will the criminals' tendencies and techniques. Scams are a popular topic in pop culture and literature. Popular scams even get their distinct names: Spanish prisoner, Nigerian prince, salting the mine, dog in the bar. I will leave it as an exercise to the viewer to figure out what scams these aforementioned ones are. In terms of e-commerce, the most common online scams are probably the sale of some internet service or the sale of some general merchandise, fake auctions, pyramid and multi-level marketing schemes, or sketchy business opportunities. These basically work by sending enticing emails to people or luring them into visiting your website and convincing them to send money to some post office box for some reason or another and end up getting nothing in return or getting stuff of little or no value in return. Destructive attacks are the work of terrorists or employees bent on revenge, or evil hackers. Destruction is always a criminal attack because causing damage to someone else's property is obviously illegal at all times. But in comparison to other criminal attacks, there is often no profit motive. So instead, the attacker asks, how can I cause the most damage by attacking some system? There have been many kinds of destructive attacks in the history. Some of the more computer-related ones could be, for instance, the Stuxnet worm, which was a malicious computer program targeting specifically the programmable logic controllers on some Siemens machinery running the Windows operating system. On the other hand, as an example of a destructive attack, driving a truck bomb through a company's front window is equally effective. It's just the means differ in these two, in the delivery of these two attacks. Anyway, what is important to remember here is that a hacker with the right combination of skills and morals could probably take down the internet within a few days. That also reminds us to have offsite backups available frequently. Intellectual property theft is a common nuisance for companies. That is because intellectual property is way more than just trade secrets or company databases. It's also electronic versions of books, magazines, newspapers, videos, music, images, software, and private databases available to the public. The difficult problem here is not how to keep private data private, but how to maintain control and receive appropriate compensation for the data belonging to a company while making it public. For example, software companies want to sell their software to legitimate buyers without pirates making millions of illegal copies and selling them or giving them away to others. Piracy also happens on different scales. There is the micro scale that is sharing between friends, or macro scale, meaning downloads from the internet. Piracy also happens to data. Digital intellectual property is being stolen all the time. This applies to digital images, video, and text just as much as it applies to software or movies, for instance. The different companies owning this data want to control the dissemination of their intellectual property. This, which is perfectly reasonable, is contrary to what the internet is all about. Unauthorized copying is also not a new problem. Digital content has no magic immunity from counterfeiters. Trying to counteract that is a bit like trying to make water not wet. It's simply not possible. Identity theft is an interesting take on theft or fraud. Why steal from someone if you can just become that person? It can be easier and much more profitable to get a bunch of credit cards in someone else's name, run up large bills, and then disappears. This is scary stuff, and it actually happens all the time. The more identity recognition goes electronic or online, the easier it becomes to pull off identity theft. Also, identity theft becomes more profitable and less risky. Why break into someone's house if you can collect the necessary identity information online? And also, people are very helpful. They tend to give out sensitive information to anyone who asks, and for some reason a lot of systems have very poor identification schemes. They use variables like your mother's maiden name and so on as the way to authenticate you. However, luckily most of these kinds of authentication schemes should now be in the history, as these are way too easy to exploit. Virtual identity to businesses is as important as it is to individuals. It takes time and money to develop a corporate identity. This means basically that your brand equals your reputation. On the internet, the barrier to entry is very minimal. That's to say, how does a user know which website is worth visiting? When the web first came to be, people thought that it meant that the big brands would come to an end, because anyone could go on the web and compete with big brand names, so therefore big brands would become meaningless. The reality is actually the opposite. Users look at brands and they return to the sites that they trust or feel are valuable. That means that a brand has real value, so therefore it's worth stealing. The internet has many opportunities for brand theft. Already in 1998, someone forged a domain name transfer request and stole the domain called sex.com. As far as we know, the domain still up to date has not been returned to its rightful owner. It's still with the forger. This kind of an attack is nothing new. For instance, the dial-up telephone, the system that we now use, using telephone numbers to call someone, was invented by an undertaker by the name of Almond Strauger. He was convinced that telephone operators at the time were rerouting telephone calls from him to rival businesses, so he ended up inventing the dial telephone in 1888 to bypass the operators altogether. Unfortunately, prosecution can be difficult on the internet. The crimes are the same as in the real world. Theft is illegal, whether it's analog or digital, online or offline. There are laws against these kind of crimes already in place. It's just that the court system doesn't work on the internet time. It can take years or decades to fix an ineffective law, but technology changes much more rapidly and laws cannot keep up. Currently, some laws have been put into place that specifically make it a crime to break into some remote computer systems. Eventually, people will realize that it doesn't make sense to rewrite laws that are specific to a technology. That's because the crimes behind the technology are still the same. Fraud is fraud, whether it takes place over mail, telephone, or the internet. Extortion is no better or no worse if carried out by using computer viruses or old-fashioned compromising photos. Good laws should be written to be independent of technology. Privacy violations are not necessarily criminal, but they can be. They can prelude to identity theft, for example. For instance, in the US, most privacy violations are perfectly legal. That is because people do not own their own data. If a credit bureau or a market research firm collects data on you, it can sell it to pretty much anyone who wants it without your consent. Privacy laws are different elsewhere. For instance, the EU data protection regulation is much more restrictive. That doesn't mean that other types of privacy violations are not legal as well. For instance, hiring a private investigator to collect information on someone or a company is perfectly legal as long as the investigator doesn't do anything that is illegal itself. And on top of that, all sorts of privacy violations are legal if conducted by the police or even expected by the general public. There exist two types of privacy violations: targeted attacks and data harvesting. Let's say in a targeted attack, an attacker wants to know everything there is to know about Alice. Now, if Alice is a person, this is called stalking. If Alice is a company, this is called industrial espionage. If Alice is a government, this is called national intelligence or spying. Computer security can protect Alice against a targeted attack up to a certain point. If the attackers are well enough funded, they can always get around computer security measures. They can go to Alice's office and install a listening device. They can go through Alice's trash or spy on her with a telescope. Computer security is only effective when it comes to information that resides on computers. That is, it only protects information on the computer. What computer security protects against is the non-invasive attacks. What it does, it forces the attacker to get close to Alice and makes these privacy violations riskier, more expensive, and possibly illegal. Data harvesting is the other type of privacy violation. This method uses the power of correlation. Let's suppose an attacker wants a list of every widower who is 70 years old or older with more than 1 million in the bank, who has given to more than 8 charities in the past year, and who subscribes to an astrological magazine. Although con artists have collected names of people who might be susceptible to a particular scam for over a century, the internet allows them to automate and better target their searches. Good cryptography and computer security can help to protect against data harvesting attacks by making the collection much harder, assuming it is simply illegal to buy the data from those who own these various databases. Data harvesting is worthwhile only because it can be automated. It doesn't make any sense to sort through an entire neighborhood's trash cans to harvest a demographic. If all computerized data is protected, an attacker doesn't know where to look. Even moderate levels of encryption can protect against data harvesting. 100 years ago, everyone could have personal privacy. You and a friend could walk into an empty field, look around to see that no one else is nearby, and have perfect privacy. Technology has pretty much demolished that worldview. There are powerful directional microphones that can pick up conversations from far away. There are devices that can read on what is on a computer's monitor from halfway down the street. Pinhole cameras are small enough to hide in the smallest cracks. Satellite cameras can read your license plate from the orbit. The US Department of Defense has built prototypes of micro air vehicles that are the size of butterflies that can scout out enemy snipers or locate hostages or simply to spy on anybody. There is mass surveillance technology to automatically search for drug or illegal activity in random telephone conversations. You can search for suspicious behavior in satellite images or for faces on a wanted list of criminals in cameras becoming commonplace. Face recognition can pick up an individual people out of a crowd of faces. Voice recognition can scan millions of telephone calls by listening for a particular person. It can also scan for suspicious words or phrases and pick up conversations out of a crowd. Much of the surveillance infrastructure is being installed under the guise of customer service. If you have heard of the ubiquitous message, this conversation may be recorded for quality assurance purposes. Well, that's an example of it. Some hotels track guest preferences in databases so that customers will feel at home even if it's their first stay in a particular city. High-end restaurants have video cameras in the dining room to study diners' eating habits and meal progress, and they have databases of customer preferences. Amazon tracks the buying behavior of different demographic groups and so on. There is a fine line between good customer service and stalking. Sometimes there isn't even a customer service pin to this. Credit card companies keep detailed purchasing records so that they can reduce fraud. Companies sometimes monitor their employees' web surfing to limit abuse and liability. Or many airports record the license plates of everyone who uses the parking lot as a security measure. Historically, privacy was only about surveillance. Then, computers with large databases entered business and organizations started to keep databases on individuals. More and more data is being collected and saved, both because data collection is cheaper and because people leave more electronic footprints in their daily lives in comparison to the olden days. More of it's being collected and cross-correlated, and more of it's available online. The web provides much potential for invasions of privacy. Online stores can, in theory at least, keep records of everything you buy. They can also keep records of everything you look at. Every item you ask to see, every topic you search for, how long you spend searching or looking at each item. Not just what you buy, but what you look at and don't buy. Traffic analysis is the study of communication patterns. It's not the content itself, but the messages. Who communicates with whom? When does this communication happen? How long are the messages? How quickly are replies sent? And how long are they? What kind of communications happen after a certain message is received? These kind of questions can reveal a lot of information. For instance, let's say Alice sends a long message to Bob, and Bob sends a short reply back and a long message to 5 other people. This would indicate a chain of command. Alice is clearly sending orders to Bob, who is relaying this message to his subordinates. Often, the patterns of communication are just as important as the contents of communication. For instance, the fact that a person telephones a known terrorist every week is much more important than the details of their conversation. As an example of this, in the hours preceding the US bombing in Iraq in 1991, pizza deliveries to the Pentagon went up 100-fold. Anyone paying attention certainly knew something was up. Well, by anyone, I mean the pizza delivery guys. Interestingly enough, the CIA had the same number of pizzas delivered as any other night. Echelon is a code word for an automated global interception system operated by intelligence agencies in the US, the UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and led by the National Security Agency NSA. Estimates have that the Echelon intercepts at least 3 billion communications every day, including calls, emails, internet downloads, satellite transmissions, and so on. The system gathers all of these transmissions indiscriminately, then sorts and distills the information through artificial intelligence programs. Potential Echelon intercepts are an unending fire hose of data. More than any group of human analysts can ever analyze. The interception equipment must decide in real time whether or not any piece of data is worth recording for later analysis. And the system cannot afford to do much later analysis because there's always more data being recorded. Moving on from criminal attacks and privacy violations to another type of attack. The publicity attack is conceptually simple. The attacker asks, how can I get my name in the newspapers by attacking the system? This type of an attack is relatively new to the cyber world, but has happened in the real world from the dawn of time. The man who burned down the Temple of Artemis in ancient Greece did so because he wanted his name to be remembered forever. This man's name was Herostratus, by the way. This is where the English term herostratic fame comes from. Anyway, most attackers of this type are hackers, skilled individuals who know a lot about systems and their security. Often they have at least some access to resources, either as students of large universities or as employees of large companies. They usually do not have a lot of money, but sometimes they have a lot of time. They are not likely to do anything that will put them in jail, but the idea is publicity, not breaking the law. A canonical example from a while back is the breaking of Netscape Navigator's encryption scheme by 2 Berkeley graduate students in 1995. Netscape was the leading internet browser at the time, the predecessor of Mozilla. Netscape's reaction to this attack was something on the order of, well, we did some calculations and didn't think it was worth anybody's trouble to start breaking it. Netscape analysis is actually spot on. It wasn't worth anyone's trouble, but these grad students had all sorts of skills access to a lot of unused computers at the university and not much in the way of social life. To them, it was a hobby. It was fun and not work. What's important for system designers to realize is that publicity seekers don't fall into the same threat model that criminals do. Criminals will only attack systems if there is a profit to be made. Publicity seekers will attack a system if there is a good chance the press will cover it. Attacks against large-scale systems and widely fielded products are the best ones. Sometimes these attacks are motivated by a desire to fix the problems. Many companies sometimes ignore security vulnerabilities unless they are made public. Once the researcher announces the attack, the victim company will scurry to fix the problem. In this way, attacks actually increase the security of systems. For the companies, publicity attacks can be costly. Customers may want to desert one system in favor of another after a publicity attack. In a denial of service attack, the idea is simply to stop something from working. Even though the term is most known from internet technologies, there are plenty of real-life denial of service attacks. For example, worker strikes in factories or bus drivers or farm laborers. We all know from experience that this type of an attack is very effective. Another example from the military context, Russian military bases in Afghanistan and specifically their motion sensors were defeated by Afghan rebels who threw rabbits over the fence of the base, and the rabbits moving triggered the motion sensors, which caused anomalies in the alarms. On the internet, some simple attacks like saying hello can be automated to the point where it becomes a denial of service attack. Denial of service attacks can also prelude to criminal attacks. Imagine a real-life denial of service attack where burglars approach a warehouse at 1 in the morning and cut the connection between the burglar alarm and police station. The alarm goes off and the police are alerted that the connection has been broken. Burglars retreat to a safe distance and wait for the police to arrive. When the police arrive, they find nothing and decide that it must be a problem with the security system, and the warehouse owner decides to deal with it in the morning. After the police leave, the burglars reappear and steal everything from inside. The final type of an attack is the legal attack. Attacks that use the legal system are the hardest to protect against. This is because the aim is not to exploit a flaw in a system. The aim is not even to find any flaws. The aim is to persuade a judge and a jury that there could be a flaw in the system. The aim is to discredit a computer system, to put enough doubt in the minds of the judge and jury that the security isn't perfect in order to prove a client's innocence. When used to the fullest effect, the illegal attack is very potent. The attackers are likely to be extremely skilled and well-funded. In high-profile cases, they can afford the best security researchers. They can use the discovery process to get all the details of a target system that they need, and the attack doesn't actually even have to work operationally. The attackers only have to find enough evidence to adduce a flaw.